I was staring at quarterly reports when my phone buzzed with the text that would change everything. "We're selling the house tomorrow. Your stuff will be on the curb." The words hit me like ice water. That house in Westfield, New Jersey, wasn't just property to me. It was where my mother Sarah had sung me lullabies, where she'd taught me to tie my shoes on the front porch steps, where we'd built pillow forts during thunderstorms. Dad had remarried Patricia 2 years after Mom's cancer took her, and he'd grown colder than winter concrete ever since. I typed back, "Okay," with trembling fingers, swallowing the secret that burned in my throat. What Daniel didn't know was that I'd purchased that house 3 years ago through my investment company, Meridian Properties. He had no clue what was about to unfold. Growing up in that two-story colonial on Maple Street felt like living inside a Norman Rockwell painting. Mom would spend Saturday mornings in the kitchen floor, dusting her apron as she taught me to measure ingredients for chocolate chip cookies. The scent of vanilla and brown sugar would drift through every room, mixing with the sound of her humming old Beatles songs. She'd converted the bay window in the living room into a reading nook complete with cushions she'd sewn herself in cheerful yellow fabric. That's where she'd hold me close during bedtime stories, her voice painting pictures of brave knights and magical kingdoms. Dad was a different story entirely. Daniel worked as a traveling insurance salesman, constantly chasing leads across 3 states. His leather briefcase was packed more often than his presence filled our dinner table. When he was home, he'd retreat to his home office surrounded by policy documents and commission reports. Mom never complained, but I could see the loneliness in her eyes when she'd set his plate aside, keeping dinner warm for another late arrival. Everything shifted when I turned 15. Mom found the lump during a routine shower, and our world tilted off its axis. The diagnosis came swift and merciless: stage 2 breast cancer. Suddenly, our kitchen conversations centered around chemotherapy schedules instead of homework assignments. I learned to drive early so I could take her to appointments when Dad's work trips couldn't be rearranged. The reading nook became her recovery space, where she'd rest between treatments, wrapped in the quilt her grandmother had made. For 2 years, we fought alongside her. There were moments of hope when her hair started growing back, when her appetite returned, when she'd play piano again in the evenings. But cancer proved a relentless opponent. The treatments that initially shrank tumors eventually stopped working. New masses appeared in places the doctors hadn't expected. Mom's strength, which had seemed infinite, began to ebb like tide pulling away from shore. I became her primary caregiver during senior year of high school. While classmates worried about prom dates and college applications, I mastered pill schedules and learned to recognize the subtle signs of her pain levels. Dad's trips became longer, his visits home shorter. He'd arrive with flowers and guilt, staying just long enough to feel overwhelmed before escaping back to the road. The night Mom died, I was holding her hand in the hospital room. Dad was in Cleveland closing what he called a career-defining deal. She squeezed my fingers with what little strength remained and whispered, "Take care of the house, sweetheart. It holds all our best memories." 18 months later, Dad brought Patricia home as his new bride. Patricia arrived with decorating magazines and ambitious renovation plans. She wanted to paint over Mom's soft green walls with bold geometric patterns. The piano had to go because it dominated the room. Mom's garden needed updating with trendy succulents instead of the heirloom roses she'd tenderly cultivated. Every suggestion felt like another shovel of dirt on Mom's grave. I left for college feeling like a stranger in my own childhood home. Patricia's changes erased Mom's fingerprints from every surface, replacing warmth with what she called contemporary sophistication. Dad supported every alteration, claiming we needed to move forward instead of dwelling in the past. College became my refuge. I threw myself into business courses, discovering an aptitude for real estate investment and commercial property development. After graduation, I started Meridian Properties with my college roommate Jake, focusing on rescuing distressed properties and transforming them into profitable ventures. Our company grew steadily built on a foundation of careful research and calculated risks. 3 years ago, during a routine market analysis, I discovered something that stopped my heart. The house on Maple Street was heading into foreclosure. Dad had apparently accumulated significant debt, though he'd never mentioned financial troubles during our infrequent phone conversations. Property records showed he was 6 months behind on mortgage payments, with the bank preparing to seize the home. I couldn't let strangers possess the place where Mom had loved me unconditionally. Working through Meridian Properties, I arranged to purchase the house at a private sale, paying off Dad's debt and acquiring the property before it reached public auction. The transaction was handled through layers of corporate paperwork, keeping my identity completely hidden from Daniel. For 3 years, I'd been anonymously covering the mortgage payments while allowing Dad to believe he still owned the house. He lived there with Patricia, completely unaware that his son had become his landlord. I told myself I was protecting Mom's memory, preserving the space where she'd poured so much love into our family. But tonight, as Dad's gleeful voice echoed through my phone speaker, I realized my secret had become a trap. "Alonzo, you won't believe this stroke of luck," he crowed. "Some corporate investor wants to buy the house for twice what it's worth. Patricia and I are going to take that money and spend 3 months touring Europe. Finally, we can leave all those sad memories behind and start fresh somewhere new." I drove to Westfield that night, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. The familiar tree-lined streets of my childhood looked different in the darkness, shadows stretching across sidewalks where I'd learned to ride my bike. When I pulled into the driveway, muscle memory guided me to the spare keys hiding spot beneath the third loose brick of the front walkway. The house felt hollow as I stepped inside. Patricia had been busy preparing for their departure, and boxes lined the hallway like cardboard tombstones. I wandered through rooms that had once vibrated with life, now stripped of personality and warmth. The kitchen where Mom had taught me to cook was bare except for basic appliances. The living room reading nook had been converted into a sterile seating area with Patricia's modern furniture. My heart shattered when I reached the basement. Patricia had filled garbage bags with items she deemed unnecessary clutter. Ripping open the plastic, I discovered Mom's jewelry box, the one with the tiny ballerina that spun to Fur-Elise. Her collection of handwritten recipe cards, stained with years of cooking experiments, lay crumpled beside costume jewelry she'd worn to my school plays. Even her gardening journals, filled with detailed notes about soil conditions and bloom schedules, had been discarded like worthless paper. But the cruelest discovery awaited in the garage. Mom's baby grand piano, the instrument that had filled our home with music for 20 years, sat abandoned beneath a paint-splattered tarp. Patricia had left a note taped to the bench. "Free to good home. Must pick up by tomorrow." The woman had tried to give away the piano where Mom had played Chopin nocturnes on quiet Sunday afternoons. Walking back through the neighborhood, I encountered Mrs. Henderson, our elderly next-door neighbor who'd lived on Maple Street for 40 years. She was walking her ancient golden retriever, Maxwell, and her face brightened when she recognized me. "Alonzo, dear, what a pleasant surprise," she said, though concern clouded her features. "Your father mentioned the house sale. Such a shame to see your family's home go to strangers. Daniel told everyone the place held too many sad memories, that staying there was preventing him from healing properly." Her words stung because I knew the truth. Dad wasn't running from sad memories. He was erasing good ones. Mrs. Henderson continued. Patricia seemed excited about their European adventure. She said they needed to start fresh somewhere that didn't remind them of loss, though I must say your mother would have been heartbroken to see her garden torn up like that. That night I called my cousin Marcus, Mom's nephew, who'd remained close to our family even after her death. Marcus worked as an accountant in Princeton and had always possessed an uncanny ability to sniff out financial irregularities. "Marcus, I need to ask about Dad's situation." I said after exchanging pleasantries. Has anyone mentioned money problems? Alonzo. I've been wondering when someone would finally address this, Marcus replied, his voice heavy with concern. The family's been gossiping for months. Aunt Patricia's been asking relatives for small loans to cover unexpected expenses. Your dad apparently lost his insurance job 6 months ago but hasn't told her the truth. My stomach dropped. What do you mean? According to my mother, Daniel's been pretending to go to work every day while actually spending time at that poker room in Atlantic City. Patricia thinks he's still earning his regular salary. She has no idea he's been supplementing their income by dipping into her retirement accounts. The pieces began forming a disturbing picture. Marcus continued. Your dad told Patricia they were selling the house to upgrade to a better neighborhood, but I suspect he needs that money to cover gambling debts. He's borrowed from several family members, always promising to pay everyone back after his big commission check arrives. After hanging up, I sat in my apartment, staring at financial records I'd been hiding from myself. For 3 years, my anonymous mortgage payments had enabled Dad's deception. While I thought I was preserving Mom's memory, I'd actually been providing him with a safety net that allowed his gambling addiction to flourish unchecked. The next morning brought a discovery that turned my blood to ice water. Checking the mail at the Maple Street house, I found an envelope that had been shoved deep into the mailbox slot. The return address simply read, T. Castellano, with no other identification. Inside a handwritten note, delivered a chilling message. Daniel, this is your final notice. $50,000 by Friday or there will be consequences. You've had enough chances. Don't make me come looking for you. TC. My hands trembled as I researched Tony Castellano online. The search results painted a picture of a man connected to underground gambling operations throughout central New Jersey. Police reports mentioned his involvement in high-stakes poker games held in warehouse spaces around Atlantic City. Several articles referenced loan sharking activities, though charges never seemed to stick. Dad hadn't just accumulated mortgage debt and family loans. He'd borrowed money from dangerous people who didn't accept payment plans or bankruptcy filings. The house sale wasn't about starting fresh with Patricia. It was about survival. The gravity of Dad's situation became clearer as I dug deeper into Tony Castellano's background. Court records revealed a pattern of civil lawsuits against individuals who defaulted on private loans. Castellano operated in legal gray areas, structuring agreements that technically qualified as business investments rather than traditional lending. His clients typically discovered too late that their investment opportunities carried interest rates that would make credit card companies blush. Wednesday afternoon, my phone exploded with a call from Patricia. Her voice cracked with emotion as she struggled to form coherent sentences between sobs. Alonzo, I need your help. I don't know where else to turn. She paused to blow her nose. I went to the bank today to transfer money for our Europe trip deposits, and they told me my 401k account has been emptied. $60,000 gone. The withdrawal forms have my signature, but I swear I never signed anything. My heart sank as Patricia continued. When I confronted your father, he claimed there must be some banking error, but I found withdrawal slips in his briefcase, and the signatures look exactly like mine. Alonzo, I think Daniel has been forging my name on financial documents. Have you talked to him about this directly? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. He's been acting strange for weeks. Claims he's working late, but when I call his office, they say he hasn't been there. Yesterday, I followed him and watched him enter some warehouse building near the shore. When he came home, he smelled like cigarettes and had poker chips in his jacket pocket. Patricia's discovery timeline matched everything Marcus had told me. Dad had been living a double life, maintaining the facade of a working husband while systematically draining their joint resources to fund his gambling addiction. I'm going to confront him tonight, Patricia declared. Either he explains where my retirement money went, or I'm filing divorce papers tomorrow morning. I won't let him destroy my financial future along with his own. That evening, I drove back to Meridian Properties to discuss the situation with Jake, my business partner and closest friend since college. Jake possessed an analytical mind that helped me navigate complex investment decisions, but he also understood the emotional stakes involved in family dynamics. "This is getting too personal, Alonzo," Jake warned as we reviewed the property files. "You've been financially supporting your father for 3 years without his knowledge. Now you're discovering he's a gambling addict who's defrauding his wife. What happens when he learns you're the corporate buyer he's been negotiating with?" I hadn't considered the emotional explosion that would occur when Dad discovered the truth. I thought I was protecting him by staying anonymous, giving him dignity while preserving Mom's house. "But you're not protecting him," Jake pointed out. "You're enabling his addiction by removing consequences. Every month you pay that mortgage, you're giving him more rope to hang himself with." Jake was right, but changing course now felt impossible. The house sale was scheduled for tomorrow morning. Dad expected to receive a substantial check that would solve his immediate problems with Tony Castellano. If I revealed my identity at this point, would it look like betrayal or salvation? Thursday morning brought an unexpected visitor to my office. Patricia appeared in my reception area looking haggard and desperate, clutching a manila folder against her chest like armor. "Alonzo, I need to show you something," she said, settling into the chair across from my desk. After our phone conversation, I searched through all of Daniel's papers. What I found is worse than identity theft. She opened the folder to reveal loan applications from 3 different financial institutions. Each document bore Patricia's forged signature, authorizing personal loans totaling nearly $40,000. The applications listed inflated income figures and claimed Daniel was still employed at his previous insurance company. "He's been systematically lying to banks' creditors and me for almost a year," Patricia explained. "These loans are secured against the house value, which means if he defaults, they can force a sale to recover their money." The web of deception was more complex than I'd imagined. Dad wasn't just gambling with Castellano's money. He'd created a network of debt obligations that made the house sale absolutely necessary for his survival. "There's something else," Patricia continued, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "Last night Daniel told me you'd been calling him. He said you were angry about losing your childhood belongings and didn't understand why the family needed to move forward. He claimed you told him that your mother's things were just junk taking up space." My jaw clenched as I realized the depth of Dad's manipulation. He'd been lying to Patricia about our conversations, portraying me as callous and unsentimental to justify his own actions. "Patricia, I never said any of those things. In fact, I've been trying to preserve Mom's memory in ways you can't imagine." Her eyes filled with fresh tears. "I threw away her jewelry and recipe cards because Daniel said you'd specifically requested that I dispose of them. He told me you thought keeping her belongings was preventing the family from healing properly." The betrayal cut deep. Dad had manipulated Patricia into destroying Mom's possessions, then blamed me for the decision. He'd turned his wife into an unwitting accomplice while painting me as the villain in his twisted narrative. As Patricia prepared to leave, she turned back with one final revelation that made my blood run cold. "Alonzo, there's something else you should know. Daniel didn't just tell me about your supposed request to dispose of your mother's things. He's been telling Tony Castellano that you're wealthy and successful, that you'd gladly help family members in financial emergencies. I think Daniel's planning to use you as his solution to the gambling debt." Friday morning arrived with the weight of inevitability. I'd spent the night reviewing every document, every financial record, every piece of evidence that revealed the scope of Dad's deception. The house closing was scheduled for 10 o'clock, and Daniel had no idea he was about to face his son across a conference table. I arrived at the property early, wanting one final walk through the rooms that had shaped my childhood. The morning sun streamed through Mom's favorite kitchen window, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny spirits in the golden light. For a moment, I could almost hear her humming while she prepared breakfast, could almost smell the coffee brewing in her ancient percolator. Dad's moving truck arrived precisely at 8:30, followed by a sedan carrying both Daniel and Patricia. I watched from across the street as they began loading boxes, my heart breaking as I saw him carelessly handle items that represented our family's history. The piano bench, which Mom had refinished by hand when I was 12, got tossed into the truck bed like discarded lumber. Photo albums that chronicled family vacations and birthday celebrations were stacked beside garden tools, their leather covers already collecting scratches from careless handling. When Dad emerged carrying Mom's jewelry box, the one with the tiny ballerina that had fascinated me as a child, he paused only to examine it for potential value before adding it to the pile of items destined for donation. Watching him handle her most personal possessions with such casual indifference felt like witnessing grave robbing. I crossed the street and approached the driveway, my presence immediately noticed by all three adults. Patricia looked embarrassed to see me witnessing their hasty departure. Dad's expression shifted from surprise to defensive irritation. "Alonzo, what are you doing here?" Daniel demanded, wiping sweat from his forehead with a stained work shirt. "I thought we agreed this was better for everyone." "We never agreed on anything, Dad. You sent a text message and assumed I'd accept your decision." "Look, son, I know this seems sudden, but Patricia and I need a fresh start. This house represents too much sadness, too many painful memories. Your mother would have understood." The casual invocation of Mom's memory sparked anger that had been building for 3 years. Don't tell me what Mom would have wanted. She loved this house. She loved the garden she spent 20 years perfecting. She loved the piano where she taught me to appreciate music. "That piano is just taking up space," Dad replied dismissively. "Patricia's right that we need to modernize our living situation. All this old furniture and dusty keepsakes aren't helping anyone move forward." I watched as he gestured toward Mom's belongings like they were obstacles to overcome rather than treasures to preserve. "Dad, do you remember the last thing Mom said to me before she died? Alonzo, dwelling on her final words, isn't healthy." The grief counselor Patricia found explained that we need to focus on building new memories instead of clinging to old ones. She asked me to take care of the house because it held our best memories. She trusted me to preserve the place where she'd loved us both. Daniel's face hardened with the expression I remembered from childhood arguments. "Your mother said a lot of things while she was medicated and in pain. We can't build our entire future around the confused wishes of a dying woman." The callousness of his words hit me like a physical blow. Patricia gasped and stepped backward, clearly shocked by her husband's casual dismissal of Mom's final requests. "Daniel," Patricia whispered, "you never told me Sarah had specifically asked Alonzo to protect the house." "Because it doesn't matter." Dad snapped, his patience finally cracking under pressure. "Sarah's gone, Patricia. We're alive, and we have bills to pay and a future to build. I won't let sentimentality trap us in a museum to someone who isn't coming back." That's when I confronted him with everything I'd learned. The gambling addiction, the forged loan applications, the lies about his employment status, the manipulation of Patricia's retirement funds. Each revelation struck him like a physical blow, his face growing paler as I systematically dismantled his elaborate deceptions. "How do you know about Tony Castellano, yeah?" he stammered when I mentioned the loan shark's threatening note. "Because I've been trying to protect this family for 3 years while you've been destroying it. Dad, you've put Patricia at risk. You've lied to everyone who loves you, and you've been gambling with money that doesn't belong to you." Daniel's response shocked me with its viciousness. "You think you're so perfect, Alonzo. You abandoned this family the moment your mother died. You went off to college and built your successful little business while Patricia and I dealt with the real world. You have no idea what it's like to watch someone you love die slowly, to feel helpless while cancer steals pieces of them every day. I was there, Dad. I was the one taking mom to chemotherapy appointments when you were traveling. I was the one holding her hand during the bad nights when you were in Cleveland or Philadelphia closing deals. And look how well that worked out, he sneered. All your devotion didn't save her, did it? At least I'm trying to build something positive instead of wallowing in grief like some lovesick teenager. The words hung in the air like poison. Patricia stared at her husband as if seeing a stranger, her face reflecting the same shock I felt at his cruel dismissal of our shared loss. That's when the black sedan pulled into our driveway, and Tony Castellano stepped out with two associates whose presence immediately changed the entire atmosphere. Suddenly, Dad's financial problems had acquired faces and the potential for violence. "Daniel, we need to talk," Castellano announced, his voice carrying the weight of finality. "Today's Friday and I haven't seen my money." Dad's bravado evaporated instantly, replaced by the terrified expression of a man who'd run out of places to hide. "Tony, the house sale is happening this morning. I'll have your money by noon, I promise." Castellano's cold gaze shifted to me and Patricia, evaluating us like potential assets in Dad's debt portfolio. Who are these people, Daniel Moore family members, who might want to help with your financial obligations? And that's when Dad made the choice that severed our relationship forever. Looking directly at Castellano, he said, "This is my son Alonzo. He's got a successful real estate business and plenty of money. If something happened to me, he'd be the one responsible for taking care of any remaining debts." The silence following Dad's betrayal felt thick enough to cut. Castellano's attention shifted to me with predatory interest, while his two associates positioned themselves to block potential escape routes. Patricia pressed her hand against her mouth, staring at Daniel like he'd transformed into someone completely unrecognizable. "Is that right?" Castellano asked, his voice carrying dangerous calm. "Your boy here has deep pockets and strong family loyalty." I felt the weight of the moment pressing down like a physical force. Dad had just painted a target on my back to save himself, sacrificing his son to a loan shark without hesitation. The man I'd been protecting for 3 years had revealed his true character with stunning clarity. "Actually, Tony, there's something you should know about the family dynamics here," I said, my voice steady, despite the adrenaline flooding my system. "My father's been lying to you about more than just his ability to pay." Dad's eyes widened with panic as he realized I was about to destroy his carefully constructed narrative. "Alonzo, please just let me handle this." "Handle it like you've handled everything else," I replied. "By lying, stealing, and manipulating everyone who trusts you." Castellano held up a hand for silence, his businessman instincts recognizing that crucial information was about to be revealed. "Continue, son. I'm very interested in hearing about your father's honesty issues." Patricia chose that moment to find her voice, her anger finally overcoming her shock. "Daniel has been forging my signature on loan documents for 6 months. He stole $60,000 from my retirement account to fund his gambling addiction. I filed divorce papers this morning and I've frozen all our joint accounts." The revelation struck Daniel like a physical blow. He'd been counting on Patricia's financial resources to help manage his debts, never suspecting that his wife had discovered his deceptions and taken protective action. Furthermore, Patricia continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Daniel lost his job 6 months ago, but has been pretending to work while actually spending his days in poker rooms. Everything he's told you about his income and financial stability has been complete fiction." Castellano's expression darkened as he processed this information. Being lied to by desperate gamblers was bad for business, but being lied to about assets and income struck at the core of his lending model. "Daniel, is this true?" Castellano asked, his voice carrying the promise of consequences. Dad tried one final desperate gambit, pointing directly at me. "Tony, none of that matters because Alonzo has plenty of money. He owns a successful real estate company. He can cover whatever I owe and we can work out a payment plan." "Stop," I said firmly, my patience finally exhausted. Dad, I'm not paying your gambling debts. I'm not bailing you out of the consequences of your choices. You're a grown man who made terrible decisions, and it's time for you to face reality. That's when Dad made his final, most desperate move. Alonzo, if you don't help me, these men will hurt me. Is that what your mother would have wanted, for you to let her husband get beaten up over money? The manipulation was breathtaking in its audacity. After 3 years of lying, stealing, and betraying everyone who loved him, Dad was invoking Mom's memory to guilt me into enabling his addiction. Castellano gave us 1 hour to resolve the payment issue, warning that failure to produce the money would result in alternative collection methods. His associates remained in the driveway, their presence a constant reminder of the stakes involved. Patricia pulled me aside during this temporary reprieve, her eyes filled with tears, but also with determination I'd never seen before. Alonzo, I need you to know that I had no idea about any of this. The gambling, the debt, the lies about his job. Daniel told me the house sale was about upgrading our living situation. I thought we were building a better future together. Patricia, none of this is your fault. Dad's addiction has been manipulating all of us. I've been such a fool, she continued. I threw away your mother's belongings because Daniel told me you'd requested their disposal. I redecorated her house because he said fresh surroundings would help our marriage. Everything I've done was based on his lies. The weight of Dad's manipulation was staggering. He'd turned Patricia into an unwitting accomplice in erasing Mom's memory, then blamed me for decisions he'd orchestrated himself. As our hour deadline approached, Dad grew increasingly desperate. He begged, promised to change, claimed he was a victim of circumstances beyond his control. When emotional appeals failed, he resorted to threats, warning that my refusal to help would result in violence that I'd have to live with forever. Dad, look at yourself, I said sadly. You're trying to guilt me into paying money to criminals because you chose gambling over your family's security. You've lied to your wife, stolen her retirement savings, and now you're trying to sacrifice your son to save yourself. I never meant for things to go this far, Daniel pleaded. The gambling was supposed to be temporary just until I could build up our savings account. I thought I could win enough to give Patricia the retirement she deserves. But that's not how addiction works, and deep down you know it. Every bet was going to be the last one. Every win was going to solve all the problems, but it never stops, does it? Dad's breakdown was complete. The facade of control and respectability crumbled, revealing the desperate, frightened man underneath. For the first time in 3 years, I saw genuine vulnerability in his eyes instead of manipulation. That's when I decided to reveal the truth that would change everything. Actually, there's something all of you need to know, I announced, looking directly at Castellano. Daniel doesn't own this house. He hasn't owned it for 3 years. I do. The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Dad's face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and dawning horror as the implications sank in. Castellano's predatory interest sharpened, recognizing that the power dynamic had just shifted dramatically. What are you talking about? Daniel stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. 3 years ago, this house was heading into foreclosure because you'd stopped making mortgage payments. I discovered the situation through property records and purchased the house through my company, Meridian Properties, before it reached public auction. Patricia gasped, her hand flying to her throat. You own the house. But how is that possible? I've been anonymously covering the mortgage payments for 3 years while allowing Dad to believe he still owned the property. Every month, Meridian Properties has sent payments to the bank, keeping this house out of foreclosure. Dad sank onto the front steps, his legs unable to support him as the reality crashed over him. The corporate buyer who wants to purchase the house is my company. I've been protecting this property, and by extension protecting you from homelessness, while you've been gambling away everything else? Castellano studied me with newfound respect and wariness. A young man who could secretly purchase and maintain real estate for 3 years, was clearly a more serious player than a desperate gambler's son. So when Daniel promised me payment from today's house sale, Castellano said slowly, he was essentially selling property he doesn't own to a buyer who's actually his own son. That's correct, and Dad had no idea about any of it. The revelation recontextualized everything. Dad's confident promises to Castellano had been based on a complete misunderstanding of his financial situation. The house sale that was supposed to solve all his problems was actually a transaction between him and the son he'd been betraying. Patricia broke down sobbing, but these weren't tears of despair. They were tears of relief mixed with overwhelming gratitude. Alonzo, you saved our home. While I was throwing away your mother's belongings and letting Daniel convince me to modernize everything, you were secretly protecting the place where she'd loved us all. Dad looked up from the steps, his eyes filled with shame and dawning comprehension. You bought the house to preserve Mom's memory. I bought it because it was heading into foreclosure, and I couldn't bear the thought of strangers living in the place where she'd raised me. But also because she specifically asked me to take care of it. The mortgage payments I thought I was making were being absorbed by my company. You haven't made a real mortgage payment in 3 years, Dad. Everything you thought you knew about your financial situation was built on protection I was providing anonymously. Castellano interrupted our family moment with brutal pragmatism. This is all very touching, but I still need my $50,000. Daniel owes this money regardless of who owns what property. Actually, Tony, there's more you need to understand, I continued. I've been documenting Dad's activities for several months. I have records of forged loan applications, evidence of identity theft involving Patricia's retirement accounts, and recordings of conversations where Dad admitted to lying about his employment status. Dad's face went white as he realized the legal jeopardy his actions had created. Alonzo, you've been recording me. I've been gathering evidence because I suspected your gambling addiction was creating problems beyond what anyone realized. I never imagined the scope would include loan sharks and identity theft. Patricia stepped forward, her voice steady despite her tears. Tony, I want to make something clear. Daniel forged my signature on financial documents and stole money from my retirement accounts without my knowledge or consent. I'm not legally responsible for debts he created through fraudulent means. Castellano's business model relied on legal gray areas, but outright fraud created complications he preferred to avoid. Collecting money from victims of identity theft invited law enforcement attention that was bad for business. Daniel, I said, looking directly at my father, you have a choice to make. I can call the police right now and report the forgery, the identity theft, and the fraudulent loan applications. You'll face criminal charges, but your gambling addiction will become a matter of public record that might generate sympathy during sentencing. Or, Dad asked weakly, or you can enter a residential addiction treatment program immediately. Patricia keeps the divorce proceedings on hold while you get help. I pay Tony his money to end the immediate threat, and we work together to rebuild our family relationships based on honesty instead of manipulation. The offer was more generous than Dad deserved, but it was motivated by Mom's memory rather than his worthiness. She would have wanted our family to heal rather than destroy itself through vengeance. Castellano considered the proposal with the calculating mind of a businessman. Immediate payment was preferable to lengthy collection efforts, especially when the debtor had proven unreliable and the family dynamics were complicated. I'll accept full payment from you, Alonzo, but only if Daniel agrees to permanent exclusion from my business operations. No more loans, no more credit, no more gambling debts. If he shows up at any establishment I'm connected with, there will be consequences regardless of family relationships. Dad nodded eagerly, desperate to escape the immediate threat of violence. But I wasn't finished establishing boundaries. Dad, before I pay Tony, and before we discuss treatment options, I need you to understand something. This is your last chance. If you gamble again, if you lie to Patricia again, if you manipulate anyone in this family again, You'll face the consequences alone. I won't enable your addiction anymore. I understand, son. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. But I had one final revelation that would test his commitment to honesty. There's something else, Dad. I've been recording this entire conversation. Everything you've said today, all the promises you've made, the admissions about your gambling and lying, all of it is documented. If you break your word, this recording goes to the police, the family court handling Patricia's divorce, and anyone else who needs to understand your true character. The blood drained from Dad's face as he realized that his son had been several steps ahead throughout the entire confrontation. The young man he'd tried to manipulate and sacrifice had actually been protecting the family while gathering evidence of his betrayals. For the first time in 3 years, Daniel faced the full consequences of his choices without any safety net or escape route. Within an hour, the immediate crisis was resolved. I transferred $50,000 to Tony Castellano, ensuring Dad's physical safety, while permanently severing his relationship with dangerous creditors. Castellano and his associates departed with professional courtesy. Their business concluded satisfactorily. But the real work was just beginning. Dad sat on the front steps of the house he'd thought he owned, staring at his hands, while Patricia and I discussed practical arrangements. The weight of his deceptions had finally caught up with him, stripping away the confident facade he'd maintained for years. Daniel, Patricia said gently, I've researched residential treatment facilities that specialize in gambling addiction. There's a program in Pennsylvania that has excellent success rates and accepts our insurance coverage. Dad looked up with eyes that seemed older than his years. Patricia, I don't deserve your help. I stole your retirement money. I lied about everything. I tried to throw Alonzo under the bus to save myself. You're right, she replied with surprising firmness. You don't deserve my help. But I'm not offering it for your sake. I'm offering it because gambling addiction is a disease that requires treatment, and I believe people can change if they're willing to do the work. Over the following days, we established clear boundaries and expectations. Dad would enter treatment immediately, remaining in residential care for a minimum of 90 days. Patricia would continue with divorce proceedings, but wouldn't finalize them until after his treatment concluded, giving their marriage one final chance if he demonstrated genuine change. The house would remain under my ownership, but I offered Dad and Patricia the option to continue living there rent-free during his recovery, provided they respected the property and its history. Patricia immediately began reversing her previous renovations, working to restore the home's original warmth and character. Most importantly, Dad had to make amends. He wrote letters to every family member he'd borrowed money from, detailing his gambling addiction and providing realistic timelines for repayment. He contacted the banks where he'd submitted fraudulent applications, cooperating fully with their fraud investigations in exchange for reduced charges. The piano was rescued from its exile in the garage, professionally tuned and restored to its place of honor in the living room. Patricia spent weeks carefully organizing Mom's belongings that she'd previously discarded, creating a memorial space that celebrated her life instead of hiding from grief. 3 months later, I received a call from the treatment center. Dad had completed his residential program and was ready to begin the next phase of his recovery. The man who returned to Westfield bore little resemblance to the desperate, manipulative person who'd tried to sacrifice his son to loan sharks. Alonzo, he said as we sat in Mom's restored kitchen. I need to tell you some things I should have said years ago. Dad, you don't need to. Yes, I do. I failed you when your mother was dying. I was so scared of losing her that I ran away from the situation instead of being present for both of you. After she died, I couldn't handle the guilt of my absence, so I convinced myself that moving forward meant forgetting. His voice cracked with emotion as he continued. I resented your devotion to her memory because it reminded me of my own cowardice. When you preserved her house and her belongings, you were being the son she deserved, while I was just trying to escape the fact that I'd been a terrible husband and father. The admission was painful, but necessary. For 3 years, I'd been angry at Dad for forgetting Mom, not realizing that he was actually running from the memory of his own failures during her illness. The gambling started as a way to escape those feelings, he explained. Every bet was a few hours where I didn't have to think about cancer or loss or guilt. But eventually the addiction became bigger than the pain I was trying to avoid. Dad's recovery process wasn't linear or easy. He attended daily support group meetings, worked with a therapist to address underlying depression and guilt, and slowly rebuilt trust with family members he'd betrayed. Some relationships healed faster than others, but progress was consistent. Patricia ultimately decided to give their marriage another chance, but with new boundaries and expectations. She maintained control over all financial accounts and insisted on complete transparency about Dad's daily activities and emotional state. Their relationship was different than before, built on realistic understanding rather than romantic idealism. 6 months after Dad's return, I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. I converted the house into the Sarah Memorial Foundation, a nonprofit organization providing support services for families dealing with cancer. The foundation offered respite care for overwhelmed caregivers, financial assistance for medical expenses, and grief counseling for family members struggling with loss. The house that had once been divided by secrets and lies became a place where other families could find healing and support. Mom's piano anchored the main gathering room where support groups met and children played while their parents attended counseling sessions. Her garden was expanded into a memorial space where families could plant flowers in honor of loved ones they'd lost to cancer. Dad became one of the foundation's most dedicated volunteers, using his experience with addiction and family dysfunction to help other families avoid similar pitfalls. His work there wasn't just community service, it was his way of honoring Mom's memory while making amends for years of selfish behavior. Patricia joined the foundation's board of directors, bringing her organizational skills and financial oversight experience to help the organization grow sustainably. Her careful attention to detail ensured that donations were used effectively and transparently. 2 years later, the Sarah Memorial Foundation had helped over 200 families navigate cancer treatment and recovery. The house that had nearly been lost to foreclosure had become a beacon of hope for people facing their darkest hours. Standing in Mom's kitchen one evening, surrounded by photos of families we'd helped, and cards expressing gratitude from people who'd found support during impossible times, I finally understood what she'd meant when she asked me to take care of the house. She hadn't been talking about maintaining a building or preserving furniture. She'd been asking me to protect the love that had filled those rooms, to ensure that the warmth and care she'd poured into our family would continue touching other lives long after her physical presence was gone. Dad joined me in the kitchen carrying flowers from the memorial garden to place in Mom's favorite vase. "She would have loved this," he said quietly, arranging the roses she'd taught him to cultivate years earlier. "Seeing her house filled with families finding hope and healing. This is exactly the kind of legacy she would have chosen." "Dad, I need to ask you something I've wondered about for 3 years. Do you think Mom would have forgiven you for everything that happened after she died?" He was quiet for a long moment, considering the question with the honesty that treatment had taught him. "I think your mother would have been heartbroken by my choices, but I also think she would have forgiven me if I'd been willing to do the work to become a better man. She always believed people could change if they were willing to face their mistakes honestly." "And do you think you've become that better man?" Dad smiled, and for the first time in years it reached his eyes. "I'm working on it every day, son." Recovery isn't a destination. It's a daily choice to be honest, to make amends, and to live in a way that honors the people who've loved us. As families began arriving for the evening support group, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this point. The house that had almost been sold to pay gambling debts had become a sanctuary for healing. The family that had been torn apart by secrets and lies had been rebuilt on foundations of honesty and mutual support. Most importantly, I'd learned that protecting someone you love doesn't mean shielding them from consequences. Real protection means creating space for truth, even when it's painful, and supporting people as they work to become better versions of themselves. Mom's final request to take care of the house had seemed simple at the time, but it had actually been an invitation to understand that home isn't a building you preserve. It's love you choose to share with others who need it most. The Sarah Memorial Foundation continues to grow, touching more lives each year while keeping Mom's memory alive through service rather than sentiment. Dad remains committed to his recovery and his volunteer work, proving that people can change when they're willing to do the hard work of honest self-examination. And every evening, as support group participants gather around Mom's piano, I'm reminded that the best way to honor someone's memory isn't to freeze their belongings in time, but to let their love keep growing, healing and transforming lives they never had the chance to touch directly. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to choose between protecting someone you love and holding them accountable for their actions? How do you balance compassion with consequences when family members are making destructive choices? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video if it resonated with you. If you enjoyed this story of family healing and second chances, please subscribe to hear more stories about overcoming betrayal and finding redemption in unexpected places. And share this video with someone who might need to be reminded that even broken families can be rebuilt on foundations of truth and love. Thank you for listening, and remember that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone isn't protection from their consequences, but support as they work to become the person they were meant to be. Until next time, take care of each other and the homes you build together.